I think the anger is, and I think it's a bit of a folly to feel that it is purely about the death of George Floyd or any other victims of police brutality in the U.S. And I think we need to start asking ourselves as citizens of this country deeper questions and stop simply ignoring the cries, if that's the word we want to use, of those who absolutely feel a level of discrimination and a level of just oppression, and it's very worrying that we can intellectualize ignoring what people are saying because it's a minority, because, as some say, it happened so long ago. The events, if we take Bristol, for example, it wasn't a sudden thing. What happened in Bristol wasn't a sudden flash in the pan thing. The campaign to have everything associated with Colston removed has been ongoing for years, and they have been ignored. And there just comes a point where all the requests to, do it the right way, go the right way forward, it just becomes rhetoric. And that's what we're seeing overflowing. And the UK is not innocent. When we make references for, the UK's, and I was listening to the presenters before we spoke about how the UK represents itself and the fact that it is so long ago and all of that, I think we need to understand that with apologies must come change. And what we have not seen is any real change around the structures that people feel oppressed by. And if we just continue to ignore people and say, well, look, it was so long ago, I'm sorry to say we're going to be having this repeated cycle onwards, and it's just going to continue. And I wish I didn't have to sound so bleak about it, but that is the reality. For us, the older generation, and I'm starting to class myself as the older generation, we've sort of lost hope that there will be any substantial change in how our history as a part of British history is considered and portrayed. The documentation on people like Colston and people like Churchill, it's there. We don't have to make it up. And if you took the straight comparison, if you looked to somewhere like Germany, and if you went to Germany, and I would challenge you to go, or anybody else, to go to Germany and find a Nazi statue celebrating the task of the great people, and look at the way that the Germans handle the education of their children, their citizens, which eliminates this ignorance. And that's what it is.
Well, it is, and
about
I think
what really happened.
We've talked about this on this programme, and that is precisely the parallel. You keep the concentration camps in place as a way of remembering the horrors of the Second World War. What you don't do is put up a statue to Hitler, because a statue is always about celebrating the person that is being represented. On Churchill, it is nuanced, though, isn't it, at the very least, because in the credit column you have the fact that he was part of a group of people that defeated Nazism in the Second World War.
Yeah, and of course he did, but that defeat of Nazism doesn't eliminate and doesn't remove the things that we as people of African descent are concerned about. It doesn't do that. We don't have to only focus on Churchill. There are so many other examples, and I know in the white British minds, Churchill is a stand-up, a big, massive figure because of what he did for this country during the war. But we have to remember that same war was a war where when black soldiers and Polish soldiers and other soldiers were finished, they weren't allowed to celebrate with them. So we don't have the same investment. And this is the part of the history that we're not being honest about. So we don't have that same buy-in. that you may have or somebody else, because we felt the other side of that whip.
Yeah, I'm simply sort of making the suggestion, really, that it is possible, isn't it, for Churchill both to have been a racist and to have said and done racist things, but also to have been part of a small group of people who are arguably responsible for defeating the very worst kind of racism and fascism the world's ever seen.
I would say he certainly did his part in terms of fascism, but it doesn't change the pain that his actions has caused and will continue to cause people of African descent in the UK. And we can split hairs as long as we want, but there are loads, maybe not on the same grand scale as let's take a Churchill. And I think it's a false narrative to focus solely on Churchill. There are loads of British-born, British-raised flag bearers who don't have the charge against them. And I think we need to be careful about this focus on simply on Churchill as the case, as the benchmark case for saying perhaps we shouldn't. If you have people who are saying to you, reasonable people, we're not talking about the few loud hooligans and so on. We're talking about consistently reasonable people making logical and well thought out representations for the removal of all symbols that hark back to our oppression. And if that falls on deaf ears, this summer day, which, over this weekend, the last few weekends have been those days, where there are going to be some people who are going to say, we're tired of waiting.
On the statues, we'll move away from Churchill here, but on the statues, you'll be aware, of course, that the statue of the slaver Robert Milligan at the Docklands in London has now been removed. The go-ahead was given by the Canal and River Trust, and there's a public consultation in place as far as the fate of other statues is concerned. That is something that I find fascinating, because what happened in Bristol appears to have rejuvenated the process of having the conversations about the statues that people want to get rid of.
And I think that is what will always happen when you have these flashpoints. So the campaign to remove the statues, for example, I think it's from Oxford, of the gentleman Rhodes. That's been ongoing. It's been in the public eye for years. Nothing's happened. And this is what I'm saying. When you have these incidents like the George Floyd incident, they create a added flame in the moment, and it refocuses people's minds on the things that they have been campaigning about for ages. So, it's almost amusing, if it wasn't so serious, to hear people defending keeping these statues up, who before this didn't even know these statues existed.
Yeah. Which, of course, gives a lie to this idea the purpose of the statue is to educate people, because I would suggest that a month ago most people didn't even know what these and who these statues represented, other than those who, as you say, had been campaigning for their removal for a long period of time.
You can imagine us sitting down having to justify to someone who, if you ask them, where was the statue of Colston, what other things in Bristol have his name on it, they would look at you with blank, and we're having to justify to people who have no idea of their history, no idea of what their history did, and therefore they're going to say it was a long ago. Well, how can it be so if you don't even remember? You don't know, and because you don't know, because it doesn't affect you, then I think at some point those elements of the British public, and you know what, it's not 100%. But I think there's a malaise. There's a point at which people are saying, this doesn't affect me, I don't care. That's not the sort of society the British say they want to be.
I want to talk about your organisation, because it's definitely not an organisation that adheres to those ideas. This is the 100 Black Men of London organisation. You have a community mentoring program which is targeted at the black community. What does that mean, Paul? Tell me about what your organisation does and the positive effects it tries to bring about.
Okay, I think a quick history will really open anyone's eyes to what the 100 is about. So the 100 came out of the US. Funny that, isn't it? Back in the 60s, when the civil wars or civil riots and civil rights activists write the best. And the ethos is in the name. And the ethos was, can you imagine what change in our communities could take place if 100 like-minded men came together, pooled their resources, both money, time, and expertise? And that's how the organization was founded. Just under 20 years ago, a gentleman called Ken Barnes brought a chapter to London. There was already a chapter in Birmingham, and the ethos remains the same. It is a volunteer organization where the core of it is about men giving back to the community, supported by the ladies, the women of our communities. And the focus is on educating ourselves, on providing mentorship, on providing economic empowerment, and focusing on health and wellness. And all of the programs of the 100 must have one of those four elements in it: education, mentoring, economic empowerment, and health and wellness. Perhaps our Blue Ribbon event is our fortnightly mentoring program, where we have life skills mentor training for both the children and their parents. And they come in, normally it's at the University College London up by Holborn, and we have sessions probably running at about 50, 60 people, both parents and young people together, being mentored and just taken through a program of life skills so that they can better cope and be better engaged within the communities where they live. It's about leadership. It's about making sure our young people are ready to take up leadership roles. And I think it's fair to say 20 years in, we wouldn't still be in existence if it wasn't for the great work that's been delivered by the men and women who are a part of it.
And just very briefly, Paul, because we really are pushed for time here, I'm grateful for your time this morning, but briefly, do you think that the demand for your services, interest in what you do, is going to increase after what we've seen over the last couple of weeks?
Oh, absolutely. We have never had a year where we've not been oversubscribed. And that is with or without the events of the weekend gone by. But as people in the community realize that this is where they're going to stay, they have to equip themselves better. The education system does not have the capacity to do life skills training for anybody, black or white, doesn't really matter, to be honest. Demand is always going to be high, and it has always traditionally been oversubscribed.